What if I told you that in 1963, an entire train packed with money was hijacked and the culprits vanished without a trace? A $3 million heist, executed with precision, left the world in shock. But the most baffling part? Most of the stolen money was never recovered. It's the kind of mystery that has haunted British society for decades, with rumors, speculation, and false leads surrounding the truth of what really happened. This isn't a fictional tale. This is the true story of the Great Train Robbery, one of the most famous and daring heists in history, a crime so perfectly executed, so well planned, that even today, more than half a century later, its mysteries remain unsolved. What makes this robbery so chilling is not just the scale of the theft, but how the criminals managed to vanish into thin air, escaping the authorities' grasp for years. The audacity of their plan, the methods they used, and the sheer luck that helped them get away, it all seemed too unbelievable to be real. Yet it was. And the real question is, how did they pull it off? The Great Train Robbery occurred during a time of economic change in Britain. The country was recovering from the devastation of the Second World War, and the 1960s were a time of growth and new opportunities. The railways were at the center of Britain's commercial activity. They weren't just carrying people, they were carrying money. Large shipments of cash, transferred from one bank to another, were regularly transported by Royal Mail trains, which ran across the country night and day. These trains were transporting more than just letters. They were carrying life-changing amounts of money. The one involved in the heist was the famous Glasgow to London mail train, and on August 8, 1963, it would be hijacked by a gang of criminals who would make off with PSW, PFCM, and amount equivalent to nearly $50 million today. Bruce Reynolds was the mastermind behind the Great Train Robbery. He wasn't a career criminal like you might expect, but rather a man with a background in petty crime. Reynolds had spent some time in prison for smaller offenses, but nothing had prepared him for the monumental task of planning and executing a heist of this scale. Reynolds had been thinking big for a long time, and this was his chance to make a name for himself, not just as a criminal, but as a mastermind. Reynolds knew that pulling off such a heist wasn't just about getting a few criminals together and robbing a train. No, it would take careful, precise planning, and most importantly, patience. The gang was carefully chosen, each member playing a vital role. Reynolds wasn't looking for flash. He was looking for men who knew how to be invisible, who could blend in with the normal public, and who could execute a plan under pressure. Reynolds assembled a group of 15 men. These men were not professional robbers or violent criminals. In fact, most of them were just ordinary working-class men. They were all keenly aware of the high stakes, but equally determined to make a fortune and disappear with it. They weren't thrill-seekers. They were methodical planners who would use their knowledge of the system to execute the perfect crime. And that's exactly what they did. But the most important piece of the puzzle was a man named John Daly. Daly worked as a member of the crew on the Royal Mail trains, which meant he had intimate knowledge of the routes, the schedules, and most importantly, the valuable shipments being carried. He would become the inside man, the key to the success of the heist. Daly provided the gang with crucial details: the exact timing of the train, the identity of the crew, and the layout of the train itself. He gave them all the information they needed to make sure their plan would work flawlessly. The planning process took months. The gang studied the train's route, noting the timing of the train's arrival and departure, the scheduled stops, and most importantly, where the train would be vulnerable. They knew that the key to the success of their plan would be timing and secrecy. If they could execute the robbery quickly, without anyone realizing what was happening until it was too late, they would be in the clear. Everything depended on the moment the train slowed down near Ledburn, a quiet rural area outside of London. The gang's strategy was simple but brilliant. They would cut the signals to the train, tricking the driver into thinking that everything was normal. When the train stopped, the robbers would board, overpower the crew, and take control. The whole operation had to happen quickly, no longer than 30 minutes. On the night of August 8, 1963, the gang was in position. The train, loaded with the money, made its way through the dark countryside toward Ledburn. The robbers, waiting in the shadows, made their move. They had already cut the signals, and when the train arrived at the designated spot, the driver slowed down and brought the train to a stop, unaware that he was now at the mercy of the criminals. The gang boarded the train swiftly. There was no shouting, no violence, just cold, calculated efficiency. The crew was overpowered, and the robbers locked them away in the train's engine compartment, rendering them helpless. The operation had been flawlessly executed. Next, the robbers worked quickly to load the money into waiting vehicles. The getaway was just as smooth as the heist itself. The criminals had carefully planned their escape route, choosing a remote location where they could easily disappear with the loot. The robbers didn't rush. They didn't need to. They knew they had time, and they knew the police would take hours to respond. In less than an hour, the gang was gone. The train crew was left locked up and unharmed, and the train was abandoned, a ghost of the crime that had just taken place. The robbers had vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but an empty train and a trail of unanswered questions. When the authorities arrived, the scene was chaos. They found the train crew shaken but unharmed, but there was no sign of the criminals, no fingerprints, no clues, nothing. The robbers had carefully planned every detail, leaving no trace of their involvement. Scotland Yard launched a massive manhunt for the criminals, but every lead they followed seemed to dry up. The investigation was a nightmare. With no evidence to go on, the police were forced to rely on witness statements, but there was nothing useful. The gang had managed to outsmart the police at every turn. They had thought of everything, every possible angle, every potential witness, and they had covered their tracks flawlessly. For months, the investigation went nowhere. Scotland Yard brought in hundreds of detectives, but they couldn't crack the case. The country watched as the story unfolded, captivated by the scale of the crime and the mystery surrounding it. How had the criminals managed to pull off such a daring heist? Where had the money gone? And most importantly, why hadn't the police been able to catch them? The robbers, meanwhile, went underground. Some of them spent the stolen money on lavish lifestyles. New cars, expensive homes, foreign vacations. But most of it was hidden away. The gang had a clear understanding of how to launder their wealth, spending it quietly and in small doses to avoid detection. Some of them went into hiding, living in constant fear of being caught. Others tried to live more quietly, knowing that they had committed a crime that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But despite the police's best efforts, most of the money was never recovered. The gang had spent or hidden the majority of it, and the authorities had no way of tracing the stolen funds. As time passed, the police were able to catch some of the robbers, but many of them continued to evade justice. Even Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, was arrested, but by the time the police finally caught up with him, much of the stolen money had been spent or hidden. Reynolds spent years in prison for his role in the robbery, but the authorities were never able to recover the full amount of money that had been stolen. Oh. So what happened to the money? Some of it was spent in lavish lifestyles, some of it was buried or hidden, but most of it remains a mystery. Could the money still be out there, somewhere? Could it be buried in a secret location, waiting to be uncovered? Or was it spent, laundered, or invested in ways that left no trace? The Great Train Robbery is more than just a story about a heist. It's a story about human greed, intelligence, and the lengths people will go to for wealth. The criminals were ordinary men, but they pulled off one of the most extraordinary crimes in British history. Their plan was so flawless that it left the police scrambling for answers, and even today, the legacy of the robbery continues to captivate the public imagination. And perhaps the most chilling question of all is, what would you have done with that much money? Would you have walked away, or would you have risked it all, knowing that such a huge fortune could change everything?